Shortly before the 30th year jubilee of Pharaoh Ramses III, an artisan named Amenacht documented a strange event. Labourers toiling away in the necropolis had yet to receive their monthly ration of grain. Late payment was nothing out of the ordinary, but it was getting steadily more extreme. One month, the workers reportedly went 23 days without pay. Rather than address this problem, officials thought that preparing for the Jubilee took precedent over all other matters, encouraging continued work. The next month, the grain did not arrive for a full 4 weeks. 3 causes are often given for the grain shortage: generally poor harvests, a sudden loss of labour due to war casualties, and finally, political corruption, as many of the same officials that insisted upon continued work were not so covertly diverting the funds into their own pockets. Eventually, the labourers had had enough. They laid down their tools and stormed into the city, crying out that they were hungry. At the temple of Thutmose III, they sat together in solidarity, refusing to move or pick up their tools. At first, those in power had no idea what to do. Men laying down their tools and refusing to work went against mayet, the governing principle of justice that applied to all men, from pharaoh to peasant. Every man, woman, and child was meant to recognize their place in the universe and act accordingly. Demanding compensation and disobeying the supposed whim of the pharaoh himself was, quite literally, an impossible thought. And yet, mayet had faltered, and it had occurred. For the next 3 years, a cycle of unpaid wages and strikes would repeat itself. This event is the first ever documented incident of workers going on strike, recorded on papyrus by an artisan named Amenacht in the year 1159 BCE. This event took place 3177 years ago. It is also the story of Sorry to Bother You. Sorry to Bother You is a film that's been generating a lot of buzz recently as one of 2018's most interesting, if not best, films. It centers around Cassius Green, an out-of-work nobody who desperately chases the American dream down a rabbit hole, ending up in an exploitative and bizarre telemarketing gig. Not too long after discovering he has a knack for it and gets promoted, his less appreciated co-workers go on strike. That's really not even scratching the surface of just what Sorry to Bother You is about, though. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking it out before continuing with this video. I won't be going through the film beat by beat, but I will be talking about some of its stranger surprises you should really experience for yourself. Fair warning though, this film is surreal, and while I personally loved it, I can definitely see it being equally alienating or frustrating to some other people. Have you seen it? Good. I think Sorry to Bother You principally concerns itself with the idea of resistance, and how that resistance is engendered and, at a certain point, co-opted. Before getting into resistance though, it's important to understand how someone can get so caught up in a system of exploitation to begin with, and I think Sorry to Bother You does that excellently in one early scene. While out driving, Cassius's girlfriend asks him to retell an old story from his youth, which makes him visibly uncomfortable. Cassius is harboring what is, I think, a deep universal motivator, the fear of not having lived a very meaningful life. Retelling old stories to Cassius is an admission he doesn't have any new ones worth sharing. At this point, Cassius is doing what I think many people do. He's defining having lived a good life through accomplishments. And if you're stuck in this mindset, it's pretty scary to think that all of your greatest accomplishments are behind you. In an absurd moment of comedy, he points towards a group of college football players who are, inexplicably, still playing football in the same field. He looks down on them for, in his opinion, constantly reliving their glory days and having nothing. As someone else in the car points out though,
what the hell are you talking about? I mean, they're friends.
This is an idea that, for the time being, doesn't resonate with Cassius. At the moment, he's still hungry, depressed, and longing for something more. The American dream. When he begins working at the telemarketing company, an older employee explains the concept of the white person voice to him. This isn't just trying to sound like a white guy, though, I mean, it's that too. The white person voice is about assuming the affectation of success, sounding like how the person on the other end of the phone wishes they were.
It's like sounding like you don't have a care. Got your bills paid, you're happy about your future, you're about ready to jump in your Ferrari out there after you get off this call.
With the purchase, the customer makes an assumption that said purchase will bring them one step closer to being the man on the other end of the line. They are buying their way towards fulfillment. Cassius adopts this method and assumes the voice surprisingly quickly, and that makes sense too. After all, the cheap idea of success is currently what Cassius himself craves more than anything. He is defining himself through accomplishments, and thus he needs to be good at his job. And he is too. Not long after adopting the white person voice, Cassius becomes a respected and admired power caller who operates on an entirely different floor of the building. It's around this point that his old co-workers go on strike. It's interesting what becoming a power caller, the movie's shorthand for the wealthy elite, does to Cassius. More or less the day he becomes one, he loses the ability to process the suffering of others, especially those whose labour is exploited. When his girlfriend begins talking about exploitation, he literally tunes her out. This idea of tuning out the voices of oppressed or marginalised individuals is brought back in a later rap scene that, honest to God, I can only really include in a video like this. Moreover though, he begins to have trouble turning his white person voice off, using it at home and during social events when he doesn't have to. His friends and loved ones can't really see him as the same person after this. This isn't just because he's using it too much, it's because he's finally becoming the person that voice represents, the cheap, empty promise of success, which is designed, ultimately, to sell things. That's what Cassius wanted, and ultimately, it's who he's becoming. One of the few rules on the power caller floor is white person voice only, or up here where all success is. Cassius's new boss, in fact, breaks white person voice only once in the entire film. After Cassius is really hit hard about how much he's sold out and traded away for his newfound life, he says,
"Look here, young blood, we don't cry about the shit that should be. We just thrive in what is, and what is opportunity."
But what does it mean to thrive in this kind of society? Do either of these characters look like they're thriving? And is it possible to thrive too much? Following this line of logic, where thriving is the most important thing, it's only rational to sell weapons of mass destruction in order to turn a profit, like Cassius ends up doing. It's only logical under this line of reasoning, again, that if you can turn your labourers into literal workhorses, you will, just like John Hamm's character ends up doing. Oh, yeah, they do that. I said spoilers, it's a weird film.
Dude, I'm from East Oakland.
It's in this latter half of the film that, sorry to bother you, addresses something really interesting that's been coming up more and more in recent years, I think. The co-opting and commodification of resistance as an idea. Shortly after the strike begins, a woman throws a can of soda at Cassius's head. The clip ends up going viral, and soon enough, the woman finds herself a minor celebrity appearing in commercials and the like. What was once a sincere, if juvenile, act and expression of frustrated resistance towards the wealthy elite ends up becoming co-opted by them and elevating the instigator to their very ranks. The act of throwing the soda becomes completely devoid of all meaning, and the person who did it divorced from any goals or ideology in the process. Sorry to Bother You posits that everything under capitalism is a commodity. Even distaste towards and outright resistance to capitalism can be bought, sold, and marketed. We see this in real life too. Though they aren't as popular anymore, Che Guevara to many young people is just a face on a t-shirt, not associated with any point in history, ideology, or movement. Today, I think the form this is taking is the appropriation of the crowd or protest. We all remember the horrible Pepsi ad that got everyone riled up a few years back, but it's innocuous enough that it's popping up everywhere. Even Angry Birds are using the iconography of the protest to sell a dumb phone game. Look, it says nope instead of hope. What a biting commentary. Angry Birds? A scary prospect, I think, to have a gathering of people in opposition to something cheapened and used to sell things. Even solitary acts of protest like Colin Kaepernick's kneeling have been commodified by large corporations in order to sell shoes. Capitalism obviously doesn't support or endorse any form of resistance, but it does know how to market and sell a nebulous, non-specific idea of resistance. While this may or may not seem like a big deal, what it ultimately achieves is the cheapening of revolutionary dialect and the commodification of oppression. It muddies the idea of resistance itself and robs it of meaning. The film shows the logical conclusion of this commodification of revolution later on when Cassius is offered a very grim proposition. He is to assume the role of one of the workhorses, the genetically modified workers that his superiors have created. When he's one of them, he's to inspire them and get them to rally together, taking the place of a kind of revolutionary figure. In reality, however, he'll be reporting everything to his superiors and making sure that the workhorses never actually achieve any real change. This is a more extreme version of what became of the Soda Girl, a symbol whose meaning is lost, cheapened, and memified into meaninglessness. The only difference is that whereas the Soda Girl is naively getting in the way of social change, Cassius would be holding it back with a leash. It's no coincidence, I think, that shortly after Cassius turns this opportunity down, he loses the bandage he's worn on his head since the soda struck him there. Sorry to Bother You is an excellent, funny, and angry movie, and it has a lot on its mind, far too much for just this video, from things like bullshit jobs, the deification of the stock market, the necessity to selling out in order to achieve artistic fulfillment, the means through which media dulls the impact of human suffering. But something I keep coming back to, or if I'm honest, even projecting onto the film, is how it relates to the American dream. And this ties back to Almanach's documentation at the beginning of the video. In Sorry to Bother You, the American dream, capital, the promise of success, one's place in business, whatever you want to call it, it feels like the new form of Mayette. It's that promise of more that leads Cassius down the path he ends up walking. It's that promise of more that gets him to abandon his morality, and it's that promise of more that ultimately ends up being a vacant performance. He loses his friends, his sense of self, and his moral peace of mind, all to have a fraction of what his boss has. And once Cassius starts to feel let down by all this, he starts to question whether there's anything that can really be done about it. After all,
Look here, young blood, we don't cry about the shit that should be. We just thrive in what is
just another way of saying it's not like things can get any better anyway. Right?
We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine!